I think it's very obvious nowadays that the television schedules for the NFL are not designed with the fans in mind who actually attend the game. For the people who watch on television, obviously, it's great for them. You've got flex games, you've got games moving into different time slots, and now you could have games get flexed into Monday Night Football or Thursday Night Football, getting flexed into an entirely different day. But for the people who actually want to attend the game and who have tickets and might be coming from out of state in order to see their team play, not even close. Maybe you were able to go to a game because the game starts at 1 o'clock local time and you've got a 9 o'clock flight out and you don't have to miss work the next day. But if that game moves to Monday or Thursday, you're screwed. And now, instead of missing no work, you're missing 2 days minimum. Maybe you saw the schedule and made plans to do something on Thursday night. But now, your team is playing, and you have to choose between two events that you had tickets to. Maybe you booked hotel rooms, and now, with the game moving on super short notice, you have to adjust your entire plans and pay even more money than you had to pay before. The NFL knows that they can get away with this, and they know that television ratings are what bring in the money, and that ticket revenue is an extremely small percentage of the overall revenue. And if you're not going to go to the game, someone else will. It's a system that makes sense from a monetary standpoint, but in many ways is extremely messed up. For any Brits watching this who get upset when their Premier League team gets moved out of their 15 o'clock window to be earlier or later, and the train schedules are a bit wonky as a result, just know that in America, where the days can change and where the country is significantly bigger, it is a million times worse. So what if I said that there was a time where a team stood up and thought of their fans first and said, you know what? Screw you guys. We're not changing the time of our game to appease television. Because in 1996, that's exactly what happened with this game right here that you've been watching this entire time between the Denver Broncos and the New England Patriots. When Patriots owner Robert Kraft, quite bluntly, refused to cave into NBC's wishes and decided to screw over television executives and the fans at home in order to cater to the fans actually attending the game. And oddly enough, he might have done NBC a favor by doing this, because I think NBC would have regretted their decision if they had their way over Robert Kraft, considering how the game went. Because this is the bizarre controversy between the New England Patriots and NBC that deserves a deep dive 3 decades later for being something that could never happen today with how the NFL is structured. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you may not have heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing, and for helping us grow this community. And with that in mind, let's talk about the time that NBC, in the eyes of Robert Kraft, stood for no broadcasting changes. Before I talk about the actual incident in question and what exactly Robert Kraft said in order to deny NBC's wishes, we need some context to understand what the original plan was and why NBC was panicking about this plan in the first place. It's November 17th, 1996. It's week 12 of the NFL season, and we have an absolutely massive game on our hands at Foxborough Stadium between the New England Patriots and the Denver Broncos. NBC has the doubleheader this week, meaning that they get to show 2 games, and this was, very clearly, the biggest game of the bunch, to the point where their number one crew of Dick Enberg, Paul McGuire, and Phil Simms were on the call. And it's not hard to see why NBC shipped their number one crew up to Boston, because the Broncos and Patriots look like the 2 best teams in the AFC at this stage in the season. The Broncos enter this game with a 9-1 record, boasting the best record in the entire NFL, and having a 2-game lead on not just the Kansas City Chiefs for the AFC West, but on the New England Patriots and the Pittsburgh Steelers for the number 1 seed in the AFC. Denver had the best point differential in the conference at plus 95, and only trailed the Green Bay Packers for the best total in the NFL. And Denver had the second best offense and the second best defense in the conference, dominating on both sides of the ball. After winning 6 straight games, with their most recent game being a 17-12 victory at home against the Chicago Bears, Denver was looking to make it 7 straight in what was set to be, on paper, one of their toughest matchups of the year. As for the Patriots, following a disappointing 0-2 start to the season, to say that they bounced back nicely would be putting it lightly, as they entered this game on a 4-game winning streak, and entered having won 7 of their last 8 games, including their most recent game, a 31-27 victory over the New York Jets. Remember how I said that the Broncos are the second best offense of the AFC? The Patriots entered this game at number 1, having multiple games thus far where they eclipsed the 40-point mark. With the win, the Patriots could close the gap on the number 1 seed and home field advantage in the AFC, and could fend off the challenge by the Buffalo Bills for the division crown, seeing as Buffalo entered this game with a 7-3 record of their own. You get the idea. This game right here that you've been watching was a big deal. And the good news was that NBC had the rights to it. The bad news? The game was supposed to start at 1 o'clock Eastern, being the game in the early window. You always want your marquee game in the later window versus the early window. There's a reason why when CBS has the rights today to the game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills, that the game always starts at 4:25 and not at 1 o'clock. There's a reason that for Fox, America's Game of the Week is not at 1 o'clock. The ratings are always better for the later window than the earlier window. Since the West Coast is up by that point, people are done running errands, people are back home because the Sunday scaries hit, people are back from church, and because it's been proven over the years that the closer a game is to the primetime window, the better it will do in the ratings. Plus, in the earlier window, there are more games on, so fewer portions of the country got a particular game versus the later window, where you can have a quasi-national broadcast. And don't get me wrong, if NBC had a marquee game on paper at the 4 o'clock window and could air this game and then another game of equal caliber afterwards, then this is a non-issue for the Peacock. The Pittsburgh Steelers and Buffalo Bills were both 7-3 entering this week. If the two teams happen to play each other and that game was scheduled for 4 o'clock, and you could have Patriots Broncos in the early window and Bills Steelers in the later window, then NBC is throwing a party. They're not panicking or throwing a fit or anything like that. However, that was not the case, because the 2 games that NBC had in the later window that day initially were, well, less than ideal. Because NBC executives had to decide how to split the country into 2 matchups that look meh on paper at best and borderline bad at worst. One option was this game right here, as in the battle at the Astrodome between the Miami Dolphins and the Houston Oilers. Now, this game actually had some significance, as the Oilers entered this one at 6-4, tied with the San Diego Chargers for the number 6 seed in the AFC as things stood, while the Miami Dolphins, after looking great to start the season off and starting 3-0, entered this one at 5-5 after losing 5 of their last 7 games. So while the game had importance, the problem was that your fan base, in terms of who would watch, would be extremely limited. And that was because by this point, the Houston Oilers, for all intents and purposes, had no fans. It was already announced that 1996 was going to be the Oilers' last in the NFL, so they were a lame duck. This meant that this Dolphins-Oilers game featured a team out of the playoffs if the season ended today against a team that was on the move where fan apathy was at an all-time high. Because why invest your time and energy into something that's not going to be around? All you had to do was look at the attendance from just about any game of the Astrodome during that 1996 season to see exactly what I mean. It's like the A's right now and how they're in limbo between cities. You can count on one hand the number of people who care about them and want to watch them and get invested in them, which is a major problem. Okay, so that game clearly won't be good for NBC as the marquee game of the late window for the doubleheader. And the other game that was on the table? Well, that wasn't much better, because that game was this game right here, as in an interconference battle between the Baltimore Ravens and the San Francisco 49ers, in what would be the most important game ever played between these two teams. Can't think of any other game at all. My mind is experiencing a blackout. Anyways, the 49ers were a good team with a large fan base. They were 7-3 and leading the NFC West by one game over the Carolina Panthers. And they had some of the greatest and most popular players in the sport, like future Hall of Fame quarterback Steve Young and future Hall of Fame receiver and the undisputed greatest receiver of all time, Jerry Rice. However, their opponent, not so much. The Baltimore Ravens were a team that played in a small market that didn't have a large national fan base, seeing as they were not only a brand new team, but the circumstances in which they became a team, with Cleveland losing theirs in heartbreaking fashion, rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Plus, the Ravens were not good at all. Through 10 games, they were 3-7, which was the second worst record in the AFC, only better than the New York Jets. They had the worst defense in the AFC and the second worst defense in the entire NFL, only better than the 1-9 Atlanta Falcons. And they enter this game having lost 5 of their last 6, including their most recent game, which was a 30-27 loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Ravens were all but eliminated from the playoffs by this point, as they needed to run the table and hope for a miracle to come back. And no one thought that this game would be even remotely close, as the 49ers enter this one as 12-point favorites. So those were the two games that NBC had available at their disposal for the 4 o'clock window. They could air the Dolphins-Oilers game, airing a team out of the playoffs against a lame duck team that had no fan base, or the 49ers-Ravens game, airing a projected blowout involving one of the worst teams in football and a team in a small market that had a relatively small fan base. With this game right here in Patriots Broncos, they were fine at 1 o'clock, but 4 o'clock? Forget about it. Their marquee window and doubleheader was about to be screwed, and they were about to suffer in the ratings mightily as a result. The Broncos Patriots game wouldn't be shown to a large portion of the country, because NBC had 4 other games in that window, and the Broncos Patriots game would be competing directly against Pat Summerall and John Madden on Fox, and the key divisional battle between Philadelphia and Washington, 2 7-3 teams in large markets with big fan bases fighting for first place in the NFC East. At the moment, when it came to this game right here, it seemed as if NBC was in a pickle. But that's when they decided to contact Patriots owner Robert Kraft. Because that's when NBC executives said to Kraft, "Hey, so here's the deal with your game against the Broncos. It's basically the only good game we've got that week, and we want to air it in the marquee 4 o'clock window. We want to give you a ton of television exposure, maybe give you a chance to build your fan base and increase your merchandise sales as a result, and give this game the treatment that it deserves. Would you be willing to move the game from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock and push it back 3 hours to accommodate us, help us out, and help you guys out too?" Now, keep in mind that today, this wouldn't be an issue. The NFL can just do this. They can just announce a couple of days before the game that's being moved to a different time slot, and that's the end of that. It didn't work like that back in 1996, however. Once the schedule came out, that was it, barring an emergency like a hurricane or something else weather-related, or an agreed-upon change with all parties. This meant that when it came to this Patriots-Broncos game, it was up to Robert Kraft to make the call. And Robert Kraft didn't think twice about it, because he basically told NBC to shove it. No way whatsoever am I moving this game. And it had nothing to do with the fact that the Patriots wanted the game to be at 1 o'clock, because that meant that it was an early kickoff for the Broncos. With this being just the third time all season that the Broncos played a game starting at 1 o'clock Eastern and playing a game in the early window. The reason why he did it? It was entirely because of the fans. You see, the game was in Foxborough, and if you don't know anything about Foxborough or Boston or geography, just know that in mid-November, it gets freaking cold up there. Because of daylight savings, the sun sets extremely early in Massachusetts. The sun was going to set at 4:20. If you play the game at 1 o'clock, you'd be able to fit the entire thing in while the sun was up, meaning that the weather would be somewhat bearable. If you play the game at 4 o'clock, for the most part, the entire thing would be played with the sun down. And as we all know, when the sun is down, the temperature goes down. A big flaming ball of gas in the sky makes things warmer. And when that big flaming ball of gas is not there, things aren't as warm. Whereas the average temperature for the game, if it was taking place at 1 o'clock, might be somewhere in the mid-40s, the average temperature, if it was taking place at 4 o'clock, might be somewhere in the mid-20s. In other words, it's a big difference. And this is even bigger when you realize that the Patriots play their home games at Foxborough Stadium, as in a stadium that consisted of bleacher seats and a stadium that had no protection from the elements. Ever sit on metal bleachers in cold weather? Not a fun experience. Now do that for 3 hours of game time, plus pregame and whatnot, and there's a good chance that you'll be freezing and you'll be feeling the effects of the game long after you get back into your car and get back home. NBC tried to pressure the Patriots repeatedly into moving the game to a bigger television window, but every time they tried, Robert Kraft wouldn't budge. The game was scheduled for 1 o'clock, and it was going to be played at 1 o'clock. End of discussion. We're not going to screw our fans over who may have made plans later that night. We're not going to screw our fans over by having them endure potential cold weather, especially on bleacher seats. We're not going to screw our fans over by potentially making them sick and having them watch the game in darkness when they don't have to. We're not going to give our fans frostbite. This game is going to be played in the early afternoon window, and there's nothing that you're going to be able to do about it. Quite the stance from Robert Kraft, looking out for the fans like that, and maybe even costing himself some money and his team some additional exposure as a result. However, it might be a good thing that Kraft got his way and that NBC was stuck with the schedule being the way it was originally designed to be. Because holy cow, as you've been able to tell from all these highlights of the competition, this game was ugly with a capital U. Kraft denied the chance to give his team extra exposure, and maybe it's a good thing that he did, because this would not have been good exposure. I know NBC felt screwed over initially, but they would have been screwed even more if they aired as their marquee game, a game that was as uncompetitive as this one, because the ratings would have dropped faster than a penny dropped from the top of the Space Needle. When I say that this game was dominated by the Broncos, I truly mean it, because when the final whistle went off, the Broncos were on top, taking it by a final score of 34-8. Denver led it 24-0 at the halftime break, and the Patriots were never, not for 1 second, in this game, as evidenced by the Broncos forcing a 3-and-out on their first drive and an interception on their second drive, and by scoring 2 touchdowns on their opening 2 drives of the game. The Broncos more than doubled the Patriots in first downs, winning that battle 26-12, whereas the Broncos finished the game with 198 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns, with 2 of them coming from future Hall of Fame running back Terrell Davis. The Patriots finished the game with just 17 rushing yards on 9 carries, averaging less than 2 yards a carry. This was New England's worst total in rushing yards ever under head coach Bill Parcells, and this was their worst total in rushing yards since they had 2 rushing yards on November 30th, 1986, in a game against the New Orleans Saints. It had been a decade since the Patriots were that bad on the ground. The Broncos held onto the ball for 39 out of a possible 60 minutes, meaning that roughly 2/3 of the time, Denver was in possession, as they completely dominated the time of possession battle. Whereas the Broncos converted more than 50% of the time on third down, going 8 for 14 on the money down, and going 8 for 12 on third down with their starters in the game, New England really struggled, going just 2 for 12, converting not even 20% of the time, and having a lot of quick drives that went nowhere. The Broncos nearly doubled the Patriots from a total yardage standpoint, winning that battle 422 to 218, and with the Patriots getting 47 yards on their final drive in complete garbage time with all of the backups in the game for Denver. So it wasn't even that good offensively. I know the score looked bad at 34-8, but trust me, this game could have been a heck of a lot worse. Denver was just running the ball and putting the backups in for the fourth quarter of the game. And if they wanted to drop 40 or even 50 on the Patriots, they could have. Bottom line, it might have actually been a blessing in disguise that NBC did not get its wish here, and they could not show this game in front of the national television audience at the 4 o'clock window. But that raises one other obvious question. What about the other two games? What about the games originally scheduled for 4 o'clock? Well, this is where NBC had both good and bad news from a competitive standpoint. The bad news was that one of their games, as in this game right here between the Baltimore Ravens and the San Francisco 49ers, was a bit of a dud. Not too surprising, considering the talent gap between the teams entering, considering the difference in record and performance entering, and considering the spread entering. But disappointing for sure, as the 49ers won this game by a final score of 38-20, covering the spread. Even though the Ravens actually led at one point early in the second half, leading at 20-17, and looking for a very brief moment like they could pull off one of the biggest upsets of the entire season, the 49ers were just too much for the Ravens to handle, as the 49ers score the final 21 points of the game to win by 3 scores and cover. And they did this without Steve Young even playing in this game, as Elvis Grbac started this one under center for an injured Young, and completed 84% of his passes for 268 yards, all while the 49ers forced 3 turnovers, including a pick 6, and had a 12-play drive late to seal the deal. So that game wasn't the best by any means. It was better than Broncos Patriots by default, in the same way that a wet fart is better than explosive diarrhea by default. The good news, though, was that NBC actually had a good game to air at the 4 o'clock window, and had arguably the best game of the entire week in that slot, with the Miami Dolphins defeating the Houston Oilers 23-20 on a walk-off field goal by Joe Nedney from 29 yards out, and in a game where the Dolphins erased a 14-0 first-quarter deficit to come back and win it to get to 6-5 and tie the Houston Oilers in the standings. They were now right back in the playoff hunt. NBC didn't have the best of slates to choose from during Week 12, as only 3 of their 7 games assigned to them were within 1 possession, with one of those games being a game between the Indianapolis Colts and the New York Jets that featured a 1-9 Jets team that no one cared about. But at least they had a good game to finish on, even if it didn't quite work out as planned. At least this game right here entertained a bunch of people, even if the stakes were lower than Broncos Patriots and featured a team that was about to move. At least the quality of football was miles better on both sides. Regardless, a situation like the one involving Robert Kraft and this game right here, as in that aforementioned Broncos-Patriots battle, will never happen again. Based on how the television rules work today, and based on the fact that the NFL does not need permission to do something like this in order to appease the networks and increase their ratings, they can just move games into whatever window they so desire with no rhyme or reason and without a care in the world to the fans actually attending the game. If this was today, then the Patriots-Broncos game would move to 4 o'clock, no questions asked. or might even move to Sunday Night Football and would make Foxborough Stadium that much more unbearable for the fans in attendance. But the Patriots, even if they didn't put up a good showing on the field this November day, put up a good showing off the field when they decided to stand up to the Peacock. Because on this day in 1996, the Patriots were fighting for life, liberty, and the pursuit of playing a game in warmer weather by keeping a game on at 1 o'clock that was originally scheduled for 1 o'clock, just as our founding fathers intended. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.